Greens, clubmates. This is Corey Chameleon, and today I have a scary story for you. It's called The Housewife, and I wrote it myself. Let's begin. Once, there was a salaryman of sorts, somewhere in his late 20s. The man, named Dan, lived in a modest apartment by himself, where he had yet to find a wife. It wasn't It was, however, not due to a lack of trying. The women he did manage to go out with soon left him for someone better, for he was but a modest man living a modest life. One late night, as the stars lit the night sky, he came home in a loathsome state, where his colleagues had already found their partners. As he looked to the sky, he muttered, "Man, I wish I could find a wife already." Dan sighed defeatedly as he went in through the front door and prepared himself a quick dinner. After some preparation, he crawled into bed and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, a sweet scent filled the air and woke Dan up. Curious about where the scent was coming from, he got out of bed and went into the kitchen. There he saw something, or someone peculiar, a young woman of unparalleled beauty, cooking up what appeared to be breakfast: waffles, eggs sunny side up, and bacon. Who is this lady, and why is she in my house? Dan thought with worry as he slowly snuck into the kitchen. Suddenly, their eyes met one another, as the lady simply gave a warm smile and prepared a plate for Dan, who was beginning to quiver with fear. Dan stuttered. "Thanks for cooking and all." The lady seemed a bit concerned. After all, if some stranger cooked you breakfast, you'd have probably assumed the worst. Perhaps as an appeal to ease Dan's worries, the lady prepared herself a meal and began to eat. Seeing her take bite after bite and seemingly enjoy eating the meal, Dan concluded that the food was safe to eat, and so he did. When every bite was finished, Dan felt a sense of bliss. It had been a long time since he had a home cooked meal, after all, and a delicious one at that. With the same warm smile, the lady cleaned up the dirty dishes and put them in the sink. After washing her hands, she gave Dan a clean suit for work. Dan got himself ready and then he headed off to work while the lady gave him some lunch and waved him goodbye with that warm smile of hers. Upon lunchtime, Dan opened up the bag containing his lunch. Among the food was a sticky note that simply read, "I love you, your beloved wife." Dan's eyes popped out for a moment. "Wife?" Dan doubted. "When exactly did I get a wife, let alone someone as pretty as her?" Dan pondered upon how scary hearing a stranger call herself your wife is. But then a different thought popped up. "Perhaps," Dan whispered, "perhaps this is one of those miracles." Now, you could call Dan a bit of an idiot for not reporting her to the authorities, but perhaps Dan's loneliness got the better of him in the end. And so, after a day of hard work, Dan went back home where the wife waved hello with that familiar warm smile. Dan told the wife about his day and gave appreciation for a delicious lunch. The two went to the kitchen where the wife prepared the steak dinner. Afterwards, Dan, feeling awkward about sharing the bed with someone he didn't know all that much, offered to the wife to sleep in his bed while he slept on the couch. Upon hearing this, the wife had a sad expression on her face. She looked at Dan as to express that she would not mind sharing a bed. After trying to fight her puppy dog eyes, Dan finally relented and agreed to share the bed, but on the condition that they use separate covers. As he climbed into bed with her, Dan couldn't help but admire how beautiful the wife really is. As he drifted off to sleep, the wife kissed Dan on his cheek while giving that warm smile as she went to sleep as well. And so, Dan and the wife would spend many happy times together. On his days off, they would go shopping, spend time at places like the aquarium, the zoo, and the bowling alley, and even just relax at home. All the while, Dan would fall more and more in love with his beloved wife, and the two would start flirting. Days would become weeks, weeks would become months, and months would become years. Dan, like all people should, was getting older, grayer. Yet the wife would strangely appear to remain just as youthful and beautiful as the day they met. Even stranger is that she didn't seem to speak a word at all. Yet her notes clearly indicated that she knew how to read, write, and overall understand English like everyone else. On top of that, all the doctors they visited couldn't really find anything abnormal in terms of speech. As time went on, the boost to his morale allowed Dan to work harder, granting him promotion after promotion. As he climbed the corporate ladder, however, he started to become arrogant and greedy. He spent less and less time with his wife as he started going to bars, casinos, and the like. One day, the wife, wearing an upset expression on her face, was staring at Dan as he was heading out to hang out with his higher ups. Huh? What are you looking at? Dan spoke in an annoyed voice. Can't that guy get some time away from his old lady? With tears starting to well within her eyes, the wife hugged Dan tightly as to beg him to stay with her, if only for tonight. God, just back off already! I'm gonna be late because of you! Dan shouted as he pried the wife off him, leaving her on the floor with tears cascading onto the carpet. Just grab something for you to eat tonight. I'll be out for the night. Dan muttered as he left the house, leaving the wife with no one but her own tears to comfort her throughout the night. At a particular high-end bar, Dan was smoozing with the higher-ups at his company when one of his employees timidly asked, Sir, is your wife okay with you being out of the house all the time? Her? What about her? Dan sneered. She's just a housewife after all. I'm the one bringing home the bacon. Dan laughed haughtily in spite of his employee's discomfort. But sir, the employee continued with his knees shaking. Wasn't she the one who supported you since... Listen, kid, like I said before, she's just a housewife. Dan interrupted condescendingly. She doesn't even speak a single word, for God's sake. What can she do to... Without warning, the world in front of Dan began to look blurry as he started to breathe rapidly. After a sharp pain within his chest, Dan collapsed to the floor. Oh my God! Call 911! A voice cried out as Dan started to lose conscience. His final thoughts was on his wife. Despite their best efforts, the doctors couldn't save Dan in time. It was a heart attack that did him in, they say. His funeral wasn't populated by much. Only a few employees of his mother, who wept for the man Dan had become, and in the distance, his beloved wife, who eventually disappeared to who knows where. Upon reading Dan's will, the lawyers were confused, for Dan didn't seem to have married in the first place. There weren't any fingerprints or DNA of any kind that matched anyone aside from Dan himself. As far as things go, the wife never even existed. Which begs the question, who exactly was the wife? A demon? A ghost? A being from another world? Or something else entirely? Perhaps some questions are better off unanswered. Happy Halloween, everyone.